Just into our newsroom, the Washington Post reports that President-elect Trump spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, his campaign has not confirmed that, saying that these are private conversations with world leaders, but it does show you how quickly President Trump has hit the ground running, especially in light of the fact that Ukraine has now had its biggest force ever against Russia, using drones, rather, in Moscow. Russia did successfully shoot down 34 of them, headed for its capital, saying that 70 Ukrainian drones were intercepted in total. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says 145 Russian drones targeted the Odessa region of Ukraine. Of course, this is just another blow between the two countries on the heels of a very large string of Russian military successes. Let's talk a little bit further with William Ruger. He is the Trump nominee for Afghanistan ambassador. He's an Afghan war veteran, but you've worked quite a bit with the Department of Defense. I want to ask you first about this call between President Putin and President-elect Trump. How significant is this in terms of timing?
Well, of course, the war has not been going as the Ukrainians would have liked. And I think that, the Biden administration, has not really, resolved this conflict in a way that tends towards American interests here. And I think President Trump, if what this reporting is talking about is correct, is trying to find a path forward that will actually secure American national interests here. And I think there's a lot of sense that there needs to be a different approach than the status quo that we've been seeing from the Biden administration over the last 2 years. And so, again, with what's happening on the battlefield there, where the Russians have been making slow but relatively successful efforts on the offensive, I think that is a condition or a context in which this is all happening that you're seeing on the news here. You're seeing attempts by the Ukrainians to continue to push. And at the same time, there will be, I think, serious negotiations and attempts to find a solution to this awful war.
And in terms of the Washington Post reporting that President-elect Trump told Putin not to escalate the battle in Ukraine, in terms of their relationship and obviously very complicated and long-held relations between Ukraine and Russia, what do you predict will happen next?
Well, again, prediction is hard, especially about the future, as Yogi Berra said. So it's very important to be careful about how you do predict, because a lot of the predictions about this war have been wrong.
But President-elect Trump has been saying that he could stop this war. It wouldn't have started, but he's also said he has a great relationship with Putin and that he could stop the war. I just wanted to interject there.
Sure. I mean, I think the fact that the president is engaged in personal diplomacy like he did with North Korea, I think is a positive here, because of the fact that he has a reputation for trying to break through some of the impasses that we've seen in a way that can support peace. I mean, the president has been very clear about not wanting America to be involved in more wars. I think he's a peace president, and I think that the second presidency will be one that is attempting to be strong, but will engage to try to find a path forward to peace. And that's what I would expect his efforts are involved here for. And I do think that it's important to recognize that the president, has a stake in American interests first. He's not going to be carrying water for anybody but America in these negotiations. And I think that is to avoid escalations, which is not surprising why he has been saying, let's make sure we don't see escalations from Russia, because I think that the United States wants to avoid any type of escalatory spiral.
And Ukraine has been asking to actually use U.S. weapons to strike Russian territory. That's up to President Biden up until he leaves office. Would that be completely irresponsible?
I mean, I think any efforts to escalate this war on our end would be irresponsible, because of the fact that America's interests, ideally, are simply to make sure that the United States doesn't become further embroiled, that there's a path forward to peace here. And then what we can see is the United States can, focus on a lot of those domestic priorities that President Trump talked about in the campaign. Those are things that would be stymied by a new war, and I think the president wants to avoid that.
Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider, and don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.